My sister dumped her baby on my doorstep then disappeared. My parents said, "She's your burden now." 10 years later, they sued me for custody claiming I kept them apart. But when I handed the judge a sealed folder his eyes widened. Then he asked, "Do they even know what you have?" I just nodded and got ready to speak. I am Bernadette. I am 34 years old, and before a rainy Tuesday night in October 10 years ago, I thought I had my entire life perfectly mapped out. I know a lot of you listening right now know exactly what that feels like. You make your plans, you set your goals, and you think you have built a wall high enough to keep the chaos out. But chaos does not care about your walls. It just walks right up to your front door. Back then, my life was exactly what I had worked so hard for. I was working as a pediatric nurse at Memorial Hospital. I loved my job. I loved the sterile smell of the hallways, the soft hum of the monitors, and the feeling of knowing exactly what to do in an emergency. I was good at it, too. I had just been handed a major promotion to head nurse on my floor. It came with a better salary, more responsibility, and a sense of validation that I had spent years chasing. On top of that, my personal life felt just as secure. I had been in a relationship with Dwight, an architect I met through mutual friends, for 2 years. We were comfortable. We spent our weekends looking at furniture catalogs and talking about moving into a larger space together. Life was following the exact timeline I had written out in my journal when I was 20. Then came that Tuesday night. I had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift. My feet were throbbing inside my nursing shoes, and my shoulders carried the weight of a long day. All I wanted was to strip off my scrubs, take a hot shower, and eat the leftover pasta waiting in my refrigerator. The weather outside was miserable. A cold, relentless autumn rain was beating against the windows of my apartment building. I unlocked my door, dropped my heavy bag on the floor, and let out a long sigh. I had just poured myself a glass of water when the doorbell rang. It was 9:30 at night. I froze in the kitchen, staring at the hallway. My first thought was to ignore it. It was pouring rain, I was exhausted, and I figured it was either a confused delivery driver or someone at the wrong apartment. I took a sip of my water and turned toward the bathroom. The bell rang again. This time, it was longer. More insistent. I set my glass down on the counter. A strange, heavy feeling settled in my stomach. I walked slowly to the door and looked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. There was no one standing there. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, ready to look down the hall to see if some kids were playing a prank. But I never looked down the hall. My eyes dropped to the welcome mat. Sitting right there on the coarse fabric of the mat was an infant car seat. It was draped with a thin, damp blanket to shield whatever was inside from the wind and the mist blowing in from the open breezeway. My heart slammed against my ribs. My hands started to shake before I even reached out. I knelt down on the cold concrete and pulled the blanket back. Looking up at me were 2 wide, dark eyes. It was a tiny baby girl, maybe 3 months old. She had plump, rosy cheeks and a little wisp of dark hair sticking up at the crown of her head. I recognized that hair immediately. It was the exact same untamable dark hair my older sister Jolene had. Tucked into the side of the car seat, right next to the baby's small, curled fist, was a folded piece of lined notebook paper. The handwriting on it was hurried and messy. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely unfold it. The note was incredibly short. It read, "Her name is Opal. I cannot do this. Take care of her. I am sorry." That was it. Those few words completely destroyed the life I knew and forced me into a new one. I stood up quickly and ran to the edge of the breezeway, leaning over the railing to look down at the parking lot. The rain was coming down in sheets, washing across the asphalt under the orange glow of the streetlights. There were cars parked, but nothing was moving. No taillights driving away. No figure running into the darkness. Jolene was gone. I rushed back to the door and carefully picked up the car seat by the handle. It was surprisingly heavy. I brought the baby inside, set the carrier gently on my living room rug, and locked the door behind me. I just stood there, staring down at her. Opal. She was looking around my living room, completely quiet, completely unaware that her mother had just abandoned her in the cold. Panic hit me like a physical blow. I pulled my cell phone out of my scrub pocket and dialed Jolene's number. It rang once and went straight to a generic voicemail box. I tried again. Same result. I paced across the living room carpet, my shoes tracking wet footprints, holding the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I needed help. My first instinct was to call my parents. I dialed their home number. It rang 4 times before my mother picked up. "Hello," she answered, her voice sounding irritated that someone was calling so late. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking. "Mom, it is Bernadette. You need to listen to me. Jolene was just here." Well, she was not here, but she left her baby. She left a baby girl on my doorstep with a note. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the television playing a game show in the background. Finally, my mother spoke, and her voice was like ice. "We told her not to have that baby," my mother said. There was no shock. No concern. Just cold, bitter validation. She made her choice, and now she is running away from it. That is typical Jolene. "Mom, what are you talking about? What should I do?" I asked, the panic rising higher in my chest. I looked down at Opal, who was starting to squirm in her seat. "I cannot just keep a baby. I do not have anything. I do not know how to take care of an infant." I heard the phone shuffle, and then my father's gruff voice came on the line. "Bernadette. Listen to me. Dad, you have to come over," I pleaded. "Please. I am terrified." "She is your burden now," my father said firmly, cutting off my pleading. "We are done cleaning up after Jolene. We have spent years dealing with her drama, her mistakes, her nonsense. We are too old for this. We are finally living our own lives." "She left her with me, not you," I argued, tears hot and angry spilling down my cheeks. "This is your granddaughter. And we never asked to be grandparents," my mother shouted from the background. "Especially not to the child of whatever random man Jolene hooked up with. We are not doing this, Bernadette." Click. They hung up on me. I stood in the middle of my living room, the dial tone buzzing against my ear, completely paralyzed by the cruelty of my own flesh and blood. They had written off both of their daughters and their tiny granddaughter in less than 3 minutes. Opal started to cry. It was not a soft whimper. It was a loud, demanding, hungry wail that filled my small apartment and sent my anxiety completely over the edge. I dropped my phone on the couch and dropped to my knees beside the car seat. I fumbled with the straps, my hands clumsy, until I finally got her unbuckled. I picked her up and held her awkwardly against my chest. She felt so small, so incredibly fragile. She rooted against my scrub top, screaming for milk that I did not have. I grabbed my phone again with my free hand and dialed Dwight. He picked up on the 3rd ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Bernadette? What time is it? Dwight, wake up. Please, I need you," I begged, bouncing Opal gently while pacing the floor. "Jolene left her baby at my apartment. I am holding my niece. My parents hung up on me. I have absolutely nothing for a baby here. No diapers, no formula. Can you please go to the 24-hour supermarket down the street and bring me some supplies?" There was a pause. I heard him shift in his bed. "A baby? Your sister just dumped her kid on you?" His tone shifted from sleepy to deeply annoyed. "That is insane, Bernadette. You need to call social services. Or the police." "I am going to call the police to report it, but I cannot just hand her over to a stranger in the middle of the night," I said, trying to keep my voice steady over Opal's crying. "She is my family. Can you just get the formula?" I cannot take her out in this storm. This is not our problem, Dwight said. His voice was hard, completely devoid of empathy. This is exactly the kind of messy, toxic drama your sister always creates. Do not get pulled into it, Bernadette. If you buy stuff for that kid, you are taking responsibility. Call the authorities and let them handle it. I am going back to sleep. We have work tomorrow. He hung up. I slowly lowered the phone. The physical sensation of total isolation washed over me. The man I thought I was going to marry, the parents who raised me. None of them cared. It was just me and this crying little girl in an empty apartment. I looked at Opal. Her face was bright red, tears pooling in her dark eyes. My anger at my family was suddenly overshadowed by a fierce, protective instinct. I wiped my own tears away. Okay, I whispered to her. Okay, Opal. It is just you and me. Let us go to the store. I did not even change out of my work scrubs. I carefully strapped her back into the damp car seat, grabbed my purse and my car keys, and carried her out into the cold rain. I secured the seat in the back of my small sedan, the rain soaking my hair and clothes, and drove to the 24-hour grocery store across town. The fluorescent lights of the store were blinding. I pushed a shopping cart down the gleaming white aisles, the wheels squeaking loudly in the empty store. I felt like a ghost wandering through a strange world. I pushed the cart into the baby aisle and just stopped, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of choices. There were dozens of formulas. Powders, liquids, soy-based, dairy-based. Diapers in sizes I did not understand. Wipes, bottles, rash creams. I stood there staring at the shelves, Opal fussing quietly in her seat in the main basket of the cart, and I felt a fresh wave of tears threaten to spill. I quickly pulled out my phone and frantically searched the internet for what a 3-month-old baby needed. An elderly woman stocking shelves in the next aisle walked over. She wore a blue store vest and had kind, crinkling eyes. She looked at me, standing there in wet scrubs, looking utterly defeated. "Honey, do you need some help?" she asked gently. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I just got this baby. My sister left her. I do not know what she eats. I do not know what size diaper she wears. I do not know anything. The woman's eyes softened with instant understanding and deep concern. She did not ask questions. She just stepped up beside me and started pulling items off the shelves. 3 months? Let us go with a standard gentle formula powder to start. And size 2 diapers should fit her just fine. You will need these bottles, the ones with the slow flow nipples. Let us get some sensitive wipes and a soft blanket, too. She helped me gather all the essentials. When I went to the register to pay, my hands shook as I swiped my debit card. The total was staggering, a sudden, unexpected dent in my carefully planned budget, but I did not care. I thanked the woman profusely and hurried back to my car. That first night was a blur of utter exhaustion and high anxiety. I boiled water to sterilize the new bottles. I read the formula mixing instructions 4 times to make sure I did not mess it up. When I finally sat on the couch and touched the warm rubber nipple to Opal's lips, she latched on instantly. The room went quiet, save for the rhythmic sound of her drinking. I watched her tiny hands grip the air, her dark eyes slowly drooping shut as her belly finally got full. For the first time all night, I let myself breathe. I did not own a crib. I did not even own a laundry basket large enough. So, I emptied the bottom drawer of my bedroom dresser, taking out all my heavy winter sweaters. I lined the bottom of the wooden drawer with a thick quilt, covered it with a soft towel, and placed it on the floor right next to the couch in the living room. I gently laid Opal inside. She was sound asleep. I curled up on the couch above her, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. The silence of the apartment felt heavy. Every hour, I leaned over the edge of the cushions just to watch her chest rise and fall, terrified that I was doing something wrong, terrified that she would stop breathing. As the first gray light of morning crept through the window blinds, I looked down at her peaceful face. "I do not know what happened with your mom," I whispered into the quiet room, a promise forming in my heart that I intended to keep forever. "But I am here now. I will figure this out. You are safe with me, Opal." The next morning, reality hit with full force. I called the hospital and spoke to my supervisor. I requested an emergency family leave of absence. It was something I had never done in my 5 years of perfect attendance. My supervisor knew my work ethic and granted me 2 weeks without pressing for details, but I could hear the hesitation in her voice. The newly promoted head nurse taking sudden leave was not a good look. Later that morning, I drove to the police station with Opal sleeping in her carrier. The precinct was loud and chaotic. I sat across from a tired-looking detective and handed him the note Jolene had left. I explained everything, hoping they would launch a massive search. But the detective just sighed and handed the note back. "Ma'am, there is no crime here," he explained bluntly. "A mother leaving her child with a blood relative, especially with a note expressing intent, is not considered abandonment in the criminal sense. She is not a missing person. She chose to leave. We will take your information, but do not expect a manhunt. This is a family court issue now." That afternoon, I called a family lawyer. Her name was Francine. Sitting in her office a few days later, surrounded by thick legal books and the smell of polished wood, the harsh truth of my situation was laid out for me. Francine was professional but realistic. "To keep Opal legally and enroll her in healthcare, you need to file for temporary guardianship," she explained, tapping her pen on her legal pad. "It is a process. It takes time and it takes money. Without Jolene here to formally sign over custody, the court will scrutinize everything about you to ensure you are a fit guardian. They will inspect your home. They will check your finances. You will be fingerprinted." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the word lawyer and the fees associated with it. "Do it," I told her. "Start the paperwork." The following 2 weeks were a foggy nightmare of paperwork, background checks, and learning how to function on 2 hours of sleep. I was fingerprinted like a criminal just to prove I was safe enough to care for my own niece. A social worker came to my apartment, walking through my living room with a clipboard, taking notes on the makeshift drawer crib and the general lack of baby-proofing. I felt judged, exposed, and constantly on edge. While I was drowning in legal forms and dirty diapers, my relationship with Dwight completely shattered. He came over on a Saturday afternoon, 4 days after Opal arrived. He walked in, stepped over a pile of baby toys I had bought at a thrift store, and looked around my living room with absolute disdain. I was wearing sweatpants with spit up on the shoulder, bouncing a fussy Opal on my hip. "This is ridiculous, Bernadette," Dwight said, crossing his arms. He didn't even look at the baby. "You are actually keeping it." "Her name is Opal," I said, my voice tight. "And yes, I am keeping her. She is my family." "I did not sign up to date a single mom," he snapped, his voice rising. "We had plans. We were going to travel. We were talking about buying a house downtown. We were building our careers. How does any of that happen now? You are blowing up our entire future for your sister's mistake." "Life happens, Dwight," I fired back, holding Opal closer. "Plans change. What was I supposed to do? Leave her on the porch? Put her in foster care?" Dwight looked away, his jaw clenched. "Maybe that would have been better for everyone," he muttered. The air in the room went completely still. A hot flash of pure anger crawled up my neck. The illusion of the man I loved evaporated right in front of my eyes. "Get out," I said quietly. "Bernadette, come on, be reasonable," I said. "Get out," I yelled, pointing toward the door. "If you can look at an innocent baby and say she belongs in the system so you do not have to cancel a vacation, then I do not know who you are. We are done." He packed the few things he had left at my apartment in angry silence and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Losing him hurt. It was a sharp, stinging pain in my chest. But looking back, it was a relief. His true character had revealed itself under pressure, and I was better off knowing it then. With Dwight gone, my parents completely absent, and my savings draining rapidly from lawyer fees and baby supplies, I had to completely restructure my life. My one-bedroom apartment was too small, and the rent was too high for a single income with a dependent. I spent my evenings scrolling through rental listings, eventually finding a modest two-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It was older, the kitchen cabinets were chipped, and the floors squeaked, but it was close to a reliable daycare I had researched. Packing up my old life was exhausting. I packed boxes late into the night while Opal slept, wrapping up the decorative items I used to care about, tossing out the plans I used to hold on to. The physical toll of moving boxes, hauling furniture, and caring for an infant alone left me with deep dark circles under my eyes and a constant ache in my back. But the hardest sacrifice came at work. When my 2 weeks of leave were up, I sat in my supervisor's office. "I cannot take the head nurse position," I told her, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Giving up that promotion felt like cutting off a piece of my own identity. "I need to reduce my hours to 30 a week. I need straight day shifts. No nights, no on-call weekends. I have a baby now." My supervisor looked at me with deep sympathy. She agreed to the schedule change, but made it clear that stepping down from the leadership track would delay any career advancement indefinitely. I walked out of her office, went to the staff bathroom, and cried for 10 minutes. Then I washed my face, went out to the floor, and did my job. The first year was a grueling test of endurance. I learned parenthood through pure, unadulterated necessity. There were nights Opal had a fever, her skin burning hot against my chest, and I paced the squeaky floors of our new apartment until dawn, terrified and exhausted. My parents made exactly 3 appearances during that entire first year. They were always brief, always announced at the last minute, and always drenched in criticism. My mother would walk into my apartment, her nose slightly wrinkled as she scanned the living room. "This place is so cluttered, Bernadette," she would say, stepping over a playmat. She would hold Opal awkwardly, like she was holding a fragile vase she did not really like, at an arm's length. She never once offered to change a diaper or warm a bottle. "You look terrible, Bernadette," my mother would sigh, sipping the coffee I made her. "You are letting her cry too much. It is ruining your nerves. But I suppose you do not know any better, doing this all alone." My father was even worse. He would stand by the front door, arms crossed, refusing to even sit down on the couch. He treated the entire visit like an obligation he was forced to endure. He never played with Opal. He never smiled at her. "Has anyone heard from Jolene?" he would ask, his voice tight with unresolved anger. That was his only concern. Not how I was paying the bills. Not how the baby was growing. "If I had heard from Jolene, you would be the first to know, Dad," I would reply, holding Opal tightly against my hip, wishing they would just leave. Thankfully, the universe balanced their cruelty with the kindness of strangers and friends. My co-workers at the hospital threw me a belated baby shower in the break room, bringing giant boxes of hand-me-down clothes, strollers, and an actual wooden crib. My next-door neighbor, an older woman whose children had grown and moved away, became our surrogate grandmother. She taught me how to soothe Opal's colic by holding her stomach down on my forearm, and she would watch Opal for an hour so I could run to the grocery store in peace. Despite the chaos, the exhaustion, and the financial stress, something beautiful was happening. Opal was thriving. I watched her roll over for the first time on the cheap rug in our living room. I cheered when she sat up by herself. I recorded her first clumsy crawls across the floor. And when she was 10 months old, reaching her chubby arms up toward me from her high chair, she babbled her very first word. "Nana." She called me Nana. Hearing that word shift something profound inside my soul. When her first birthday arrived, I could not afford to throw a lavish party at a fancy venue like the other moms I saw online. Instead, I invited my coworkers, my neighbor, and the wonderful lady who ran Opal's daycare over to our small apartment. We strung cheap paper streamers from the ceiling. We baked a boxed cake in my chipped kitchen oven. Opal wore a little pink dress from a thrift store and smashed purple frosting all over her face, laughing hysterically while we all cheered and took pictures. My parents had declined the invitation, claiming they had a prior commitment to attend a community dinner. I did not even care. That night, after the guests had left and the apartment was quiet, I carried Opal into her room. The walls were decorated with cheap peel-and-stick decals of animals. I laid her down in the sturdy wooden crib my coworkers had gifted us, pulling a soft blanket up to her chest. I stood by the railing, watching her chest rise and fall in the dim light of the nightlight. I realized, in that quiet moment, that my entire perspective had shifted. I was no longer caring for this child out of familial obligation. I was no longer just the aunt cleaning up her sister's mess. I loved her. I loved her with a fierce, overwhelming, terrifying intensity. She was the absolute center of my universe. The life I had lost, the promotion, the boyfriend, the pristine apartment, none of it mattered anymore. I would burn the world down to keep her safe. "Happy birthday, sweet girl," I whispered, leaning over to kiss her warm forehead. "We made it through our first year together. It is you and me against the world." 5 years passed. They say the days are long but the years are short, and nothing has ever been more true. Opal grew from a waddling toddler into a bright, curious, incredibly observant 5-year-old. We had established a beautiful, predictable rhythm to our lives. Every morning started the exact same way. I would be in the kitchen, brewing coffee, and I would hear the soft patter of her bare feet on the hallway floorboards. She would peek around the doorframe, dragging her stuffed rabbit behind her, her dark curls wild from sleep. "Nana, is today library day?" she would ask, rubbing her eyes. "Can I wear my red shoes? Will you make the pancakes with the blueberry smiles?" We were a team. I had eventually left the hospital entirely, taking a job as a school nurse at an elementary school across the district from where Opal attended kindergarten. The salary was slightly lower, but the hours were exactly what I needed. I had weekends off, holidays off, and I was home by 4 o'clock every single day. My ambitions of climbing the medical hierarchy were long gone, replaced by the ambition of making sure my daughter had a hot dinner and help with her spelling homework. As Opal got older, her brain started putting pieces together. She noticed that the other kids at school had moms and dads, and she had Nana. She started asking questions, innocent but sharp, about where she came from. I promised myself I would never lie to her. I wanted her to know her story, but I wanted to protect her heart. One Sunday morning, we were sitting on the floor of her bedroom building a massive tower out of colorful plastic blocks. She paused, holding a yellow block in her hand, and looked at me with her huge, dark eyes. "Nana, where is my birth mother?" she asked. I put my block down. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice light and steady. "Well, your birth mother is my sister, Jolene. Do you remember me telling you about her?" Opal nodded slowly. "Is she coming back?" "I do not know, sweetie," I answered honestly. "When you were born, Jolene was very, very sick. Her brain and her heart were not healthy enough to be a mommy. But she loved you enough to know that you needed someone who could take care of you perfectly. So she made sure you came to me. And I am so lucky she did." "But you are my mom," Opal said, her brow furrowing in confusion. To help her understand, I spent a week cutting pictures out of magazines and printing photos from the internet to make a homemade storybook. We sat on the couch, and I read it to her. I showed her pictures of families with 2 dads, families with grandparents raising kids, families with adopted children, and a picture of me and her. "Families are not just about who you look like, Opal," I explained, tracing the edge of our photo. "Families are about who loves you, who takes care of you, and who makes you feel safe." A few days later, Opal came running out of her bedroom holding a piece of construction paper. She had drawn 2 stick figures using her favorite markers. One was tall with brown hair, and one was small with wild black curls. Surrounding the two figures was a massive, slightly lopsided red heart. "Look what I made for you, Nana," she beamed, thrusting the paper into my hands. "Oh, Opal, this is beautiful," I said, my throat tightening as I looked at the drawing. "Is this us?" "Yes. That is you and me inside a heart," she announced proudly, placing her small hands on her hips. "Because we are a heart family. Miss Peterson at school told us that some families are made from blood, and some are made from heart. And heart families are just as real." I pulled her into my lap and hugged her so tightly she giggled. "Miss Peterson is very wise," I whispered into her hair, blinking back tears. "We are definitely a heart family." "And that is the best kind," Opal declared with the absolute, unshakable certainty that only a 5-year-old possesses. I took that drawing and taped it to the absolute center of the refrigerator door. It stayed there for years. Providing for a growing child on a single income was a constant, grinding pressure. As Opal entered elementary school, I realized that love was not going to pay for her future. I needed to build a safety net. I needed to start a college fund. So, I took on a second job. After picking Opal up from school, helping her with homework, feeding her dinner, and tucking her into bed, I would brew a fresh pot of coffee and boot up my computer. I worked as a telehealth consulting nurse from 8 o'clock at night until midnight, 3 nights a week. I answered calls from worried parents about fevers and rashes, my voice hushed so I would not wake Opal in the next room. It was exhausting. My eyes constantly burned from staring at the screen, and I lived in a perpetual state of sleep deprivation. I skipped buying new clothes for myself, I drove a car that rattled when it hit 50 miles per hour, and I clipped coupons like it was an Olympic sport. Every extra dollar from that second salary went directly into a high-yield savings account with Opal's name on it. But the hard work eventually paid off. When Opal turned 8, I looked at our savings and realized we had enough for a real reward. We took our very first actual vacation. We packed up my rattling car and drove across 3 states to visit Yellowstone National Park. The drive took 2 days. We sang loudly to the radio with the windows down, eating gas station snacks and playing license plate games. When we finally arrived, watching Opal's face light up as she saw a massive bison walking across the road, or her absolute awe as the Old Faithful geyser erupted into the sky, made every single late-night shift and missed hour of sleep completely worth it. We stood by the railing, holding hands, the mist from the geyser settling on our faces. We were a family. Complete and whole. Under my bed back at the apartment, hidden in a dusty shoebox, I kept a secret. It was a stack of thick envelopes. Over the years, whenever Opal hit a major milestone, I wrote a letter to Jolene. I wrote about Opal's first steps, her first missing tooth, the time she played a tree in the school play. I wrote about her favorite colors, her fear of spiders, and her incredible talent for drawing. I never sent them. I had no address to send them to. But writing them helped me process the lingering anger and sadness. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit on the edge of my bed and wonder if Jolene ever thought about the little girl she abandoned in the rain. Did she regret it? Was she even alive? The answer to those questions came crashing into my life on an ordinary Tuesday evening, exactly 10 years after Opal arrived. Opal was 10 years old, thriving in the 5th grade. We were sitting at the kitchen table. I was peeling potatoes for dinner, and she was intensely focused on a science project about the solar system, carefully painting a styrofoam ball blue and green to represent Earth. My cell phone, sitting on the counter, began to vibrate. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number with an out-of-state area code. I almost hit ignore, assuming it was a telemarketer trying to sell me an extended car warranty. But some strange, heavy instinct settled in my gut. I swiped my finger across the screen and pressed the phone to my ear. "Hello?" I said. "Bernadette?" The voice on the other end was hesitant, slightly raspy, but deeply familiar. It was a voice I had not heard in a decade, but it triggered a physical reaction in my body. The breath caught in my throat. The potato peeler slipped from my fingers and clattered into the metal sink. "It is Jolene," the voice said. I froze. I looked over at Opal. She was happily humming a pop song, dabbing green paint onto her earth, completely oblivious to the fact that the ghost of her past was currently on the phone. I grabbed the phone tighter and walked quickly out of the kitchen, down the short hallway, and stepped into my bedroom, pushing the door firmly shut behind me. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard it physically hurt. "Jolene?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "Where are you? Are you alive? Are you okay?" "I am fine, Bernadette," Jolene said. Her voice sounded steady. Much steadier than the chaotic, frantic tone I remembered from 10 years ago. "I am actually in town. I drove in yesterday. I was hoping we could meet and talk." I sat down heavily on the edge of my mattress, my mind spinning violently. 10 years of silence. 10 years of struggling, crying, celebrating, and building a life without her. And now she was just down the street, asking for a chat over coffee. "Talk?" I echoed, feeling a sudden surge of defensive anger. "You disappear for 10 years, leave a baby on my porch, and now you want to talk? Please, Bernadette. Just give me 1 hour. Alone. I need to explain." I looked at the closed bedroom door, thinking of the little girl painting planets in the kitchen. I needed to know what Jolene wanted before I let her anywhere near Opal. "Fine," I said coldly. "Tomorrow. 10 a.m. at the diner on Elm Street. Do not be late." I hung up the phone and threw it onto the bed. I spent the entire night tossing and turning, alternating between a deep, burning rage at her audacity and a strange, cautious relief that my sister was not dead in a ditch somewhere. The next morning, after I dropped Opal off at school, pretending everything was perfectly normal, I drove to the diner. I sat in a booth by the window, my hands wrapped tightly around a mug of black coffee, watching the parking lot. At exactly 10 o'clock, a sleek, late-model sedan pulled up. A woman stepped out, and I had to squint to make sure it was really her. Jolene was 36 now. The wild, unkempt curls of her youth were gone, replaced by a sophisticated, shoulder-length bob that looked professionally styled. She was wearing a tailored blazer, crisp dark jeans, and carried a leather handbag that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent. She looked healthy. Her skin was clear, her eyes were bright. She looked worlds away from the desperate, hollowed-out addict who had vanished into the rain. She walked into the diner, spotted me, and offered a tight, nervous smile. She slid into the booth across from me. Up close, I could see the fine lines around her eyes, but she carried an undeniable air of wealth and stability. "You look good, Bernadette," Jolene said softly, folding her manicured hands on the table. "You look different," I replied, my voice guarded. I did not smile back. "Where have you been, Jolene?" 10 years. Jolene looked down at her hands, taking a deep breath. I know how terrible it is. But I have been sober for 7 years, Bernadette. 7 years clean." She proceeded to tell me her story. After leaving Opal, she had hitchhiked to the West Coast, spiraling deeper into drug addiction. She spent 2 years living on the streets, bouncing between shelters and bad situations until she finally hit rock bottom. A court order forced her into a strict rehabilitation program. "That program saved my life," Jolene said, looking up at me with earnest eyes. "I got clean. I stayed clean. While I was in a halfway house, I went back to school and got a degree in graphic design. And I met someone. His name is Vernon. He works in finance. He is incredibly supportive. We have been married for 4 years now." I sat there, listening to this tale of redemption, feeling a complex knot of emotions. I was glad she was healthy. I truly was. But watching her sit there in her expensive blazer, talking about her perfect new life, made the years of my own struggle bubble up to the surface. "Why did you leave her?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why just drop her on the mat and run? Jolene's eyes filled with tears. She reached into her purse and pulled out a tissue. Because I was using heavily during my pregnancy. I tried to stop, Bernadette, I really did. But I could not. When Opal was born, I was terrified she would have health problems because of me. The guilt ate me alive. Then the postpartum depression hit, and I relapsed hard. The night I brought her to you, I had been on a bender for 3 days. I was hallucinating. I knew, in my few moments of clarity, that if I kept her, I was going to accidentally kill her. Leaving her with you, it was the only good decision I made in my entire 20s. She wiped her eyes, taking a shuddering breath. I am so sorry I put that burden on you. But I knew you were strong. I knew you would keep her safe. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I unlocked it and pulled up my photo album. I slid the phone across the table to her. Her name is Opal, I said firmly. And she was never a burden. Jolene picked up the phone. For the next 20 minutes, she sat in the diner booth, swiping through a decade of the life she had thrown away. She saw Opal's first steps in my cramped apartment. She saw the cheap birthday cakes, the Halloween costumes I had sewn by hand, the first day of kindergarten with her oversized backpack. She saw the trip to Yellowstone, Opal smiling in front of the mountains. Tears streamed freely down Jolene's face, ruining her perfect makeup. She is beautiful, Jolene whispered, her finger tracing Opal's smiling face on the screen. She looks so happy. You did an amazing job, Bernadette. You gave her a life I never could have. My anger softened, just a fraction. I saw genuine remorse in her eyes. I saw a woman who had broken herself and spent years gluing the pieces back together. Jolene slid the phone back to me and looked me directly in the eye. Bernadette, she said, her voice trembling but hopeful. I do not want to disrupt her life. I know you are her mother in every way that counts. But I am healthy now. I am stable. And I would really like to meet her. If you think that would be okay. I spent the next week consulting with a child psychologist before I ever let Jolene near Opal. I sat in a waiting room with brightly colored chairs and a ticking wall clock, my knee bouncing nervously. The doctor advised me to take it incredibly slow. He told me to explain to Opal that her birth mother was healthy now and wanted to say hello, but to emphasize that absolutely nothing about our daily life was going to change. We arranged the first meeting for a Saturday afternoon at the local children's museum. It was a neutral location. It was loud, chaotic, and filled with interactive exhibits, which meant there would be plenty of distractions if the tension became too much. I held Opal's small hand as we walked past the giant dinosaur skeleton in the lobby. My palms were sweating. I spotted Jolene standing near the water play area. She was wearing a casual but clearly expensive cashmere sweater. She looked incredibly nervous, twisting the strap of her leather purse around her fingers. When Jolene saw us, her breath visibly caught in her throat. She took a step forward, then stopped, clearly unsure of her boundaries. Opal immediately stepped behind my legs, peeking out at this strange woman. Hello, Opal, Jolene said, her voice soft and trembling. She knelt down to eye level, ignoring the splash of water on the floor soaking into the knees of her designer jeans. I have been looking forward to meeting you for a very long time. Opal gripped the fabric of my jeans. Hi, she replied quietly. Nana says you are my birth mother. You are her sister. That is right, Jolene smiled bravely, though her eyes were shining with unshed tears. I am your birth mother. That means you grew in my tummy before you were born. But I was sick back then, and I had to go away to get better. Opal nodded solemnly, processing the information with the surprising gravity that children often possess. She looked at Jolene, then looked up at me, and then back at Jolene. Okay, Opal said simply. But Nana is my real mom. She makes me chicken noodle soup when I have a fever, and she helps me with my math homework, and she always checks under the bed for monsters. Jolene physically flinched. The words were completely innocent, delivered without a single ounce of malice, but they were devastatingly sharp. I saw Jolene swallow hard, forcing the smile to stay on her face. "That is absolutely right, Opal," Jolene said, her voice cracking. "You are very lucky to have such a wonderful mom. I just want to be your friend." Over the following months, we established a careful, highly supervised routine. Jolene became a regular, if distant, presence in our lives. We would meet at parks, at the zoo, or at family-friendly restaurants. She brought gifts. Lots of them. And they were always expensive. She bought Opal a massive, intricately carved wooden dollhouse that took up half my living room. She brought designer clothes that Opal was afraid to get dirty. I watched it all with a tight knot of anxiety in my stomach, but I kept my mouth shut. I reasoned that Jolene was just trying to buy back the time she had lost. She never pushed my boundaries. She always deferred to my parenting decisions. If Opal wanted ice cream before dinner, Jolene would look at me for permission first. It felt manageable. It felt like we were navigating a strange but peaceful new normal. Then, about 6 months into this routine, the illusion completely shattered. Jolene and her husband, Vernon, invited me over for dinner at my apartment. They told me they had big news to share. I spent 2 hours scrubbing my kitchen and cooking a roast, wanting to make a good impression on the man who was now legally tied to my sister. Vernon arrived wearing a crisp dress shirt and an expensive watch that caught the light every time he moved his wrist. He was handsome, but he had a cold, calculating look in his eyes. He walked into my small apartment and immediately looked around, his eyes lingering on the chipped paint near the baseboards and the worn fabric of my second-hand couch. He did not say anything rude, but the judgment radiated off him in waves. The dinner started off politely enough. We talked about the weather, about Opal's art classes, and about the terrible traffic in the city. But the air in the room felt thick. I could see Vernon watching Jolene closely, almost like a director watching an actor on a stage, waiting for her to deliver her lines. Finally, as I was clearing the dinner plates and setting down 3 cups of coffee, Jolene cleared her throat. She looked at Vernon, who gave her a single, sharp nod. "Bernadette," Jolene started, picking at her napkin. "We have some wonderful news. Vernon and I are moving permanently to the city. We actually bought a house in the Oakwood district. It has 4 bedrooms, a massive backyard, and it is in the absolute best school district." "Oh," I said, sitting down slowly. "That is a big move. You are leaving the West Coast entirely?" "Yes," Vernon chimed in, leaning forward and resting his elbows on my cheap dining table. "We want to put down roots. And, more importantly, we want to be close to Opal." Warning bells immediately started ringing in my head. A cold sweat prickled the back of my neck. "That is nice of you," I said carefully. "I am sure Opal will enjoy seeing you guys on the weekends." "Actually, Bernadette," Jolene said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She refused to meet my eyes. "Now that we are settled, and we have a stable environment, and we have the financial means, I want to be Opal's mother again. Legally, I mean." My coffee cup hit the saucer with a loud clatter. The brown liquid sloshed over the rim and stained the tablecloth. I stared at my sister, my brain struggling to process the words coming out of her mouth. "What exactly are you saying?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. Vernon stepped in smoothly, his tone dripping with a condescending kind of pity. "We think it would be best for Opal to come live with us full-time. You have done a truly admirable job keeping her alive and well, Bernadette. No one is taking that away from you. But a child belongs with her biological mother when the circumstances allow for it." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I am her mother," I hissed, leaning across the table. I kept my voice down because Opal was in the next room watching a cartoon. "I have been her mother for 10 years. You abandoned her in a rainstorm." I was sick. Jolene fired back, her own anger finally surfacing. "And I am better now. Biologically, she is mine. And look at this place, Bernadette. You are working yourself to the bone. You live in a tiny apartment. I make a comfortable salary, I argued, my hands shaking with rage. We have everything we need. You have the bare minimum, Vernon interrupted, waving a hand dismissively around my living room. I make 6 figures. We can offer her a fully funded college fund right now. We can take her on international vacations. We can give her a bedroom twice the size of your entire living room. You are holding her back from a better life out of pure selfishness. Selfishness? I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the linoleum floor. I pointed a trembling finger at the door. Get out. Both of you. Right now. Bernadette, be reasonable, Jolene pleaded, standing up. I am not having a negotiation about my daughter over coffee. I yelled, abandoning my attempts to stay quiet. Opal's cartoon paused in the other room. You do not get to drop a child on a welcome mat, disappear for a decade, and then buy her back with a big house and a college fund. Get out of my home. They left, but the smug look on Vernon's face as he walked out the door told me this was not over. It was just the beginning. I barely slept that night. I sat on the floor next to Opal's bed, watching her breathe, terrified that someone was going to knock down my door and snatch her away in the dark. 2 days later, the situation went from a nightmare to a total catastrophe. My parents, who I had not spoken to in nearly 4 months, called and demanded I bring Opal over for Sunday dinner. They said it was important. I drove to my childhood home with a heavy heart, hoping to find some shred of familial support. Maybe I could tell them what Jolene was trying to do, and maybe, for once in their lives, they would stand up for me. I unlocked the front door and walked into the hallway, smelling the familiar scent of my mother's pot roast. I took Opal's coat, hung it on the rack, and walked into the formal dining room. Sitting at the large oak table, sipping wine and laughing with my parents, were Jolene and Vernon. I stopped dead in my tracks. Opal bumped into my legs. What is this? I asked, my voice echoing in the sudden silence of the room. My father set his wine glass down. He looked completely relaxed, completely comfortable. Sit down, Bernadette. Your sister has told us everything. I stared at my mother, who was beaming at Jolene like she had just returned from winning a war. Told you what? I demanded. About her amazing recovery, my mother said, clasping her hands together. About her marriage to Vernon. And about their wonderful plan to bring Opal back into a proper, traditional family environment. I felt a wave of dizziness hit me. The betrayal was so sharp, so unexpected, that I literally had to grab the back of a dining chair to stay standing. You are supporting this? You are supporting her taking Opal away from me? Be reasonable, Bernadette, my father said, his tone thick with authority. You have done your duty. You stepped up when there was a mess to clean up. But Jolene has turned her life around. She can offer Opal a real family. A mother and a father. Blood is blood. The child belongs with her actual parents. I am her actual parent. I screamed, no longer caring about the volume. Opal grabbed my hand, her small fingers gripping me tightly. She was terrified. Do not raise your voice in my house, my father warned, his face darkening. A terrible, sickening thought occurred to me. I looked at Jolene, then back at my mother. How long have you known she was back? I asked. My parents exchanged a quick, guilty glance. My mother cleared her throat. Jolene reached out to us about 3 years ago, when she finished her rehabilitation program. 3 years? I repeated, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. You have known where she was for 3 years? You came to my apartment, you criticized my parenting, you watched me work myself to the bone, and you knew she was alive and married and you never told me? She asked us to keep it quiet, my mother defended herself defensively. She wanted to make sure she was completely stable before she disrupted your life. You did not keep it quiet to protect me, I said, my voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You kept it quiet because you never cared about us. You only ever cared about Jolene. You two are monsters. I turned around, gripping Opal's hand. We are leaving. Bernadette, stop acting like a child, my father yelled, standing up from the table. I did not look back. I marched down the hallway, grabbed Opal's coat, and walked out the front door, slamming it so hard the windows rattled in their frames. The drive home was silent. The streetlights flashed rhythmically through the car windows. Opal sat in the back seat, staring straight ahead. Nana, she finally said, her voice small and trembling. Grandpa said I have to go live with the lady. Is that true? Are you giving me away? I pulled the car over to the side of the road, slamming the gearshift into park. I unbuckled my seatbelt, climbed into the back seat, and pulled her into my arms. She buried her face in my shoulder and started to sob. Listen to me, Opal, I said fiercely, holding her head against my chest. You are my daughter. You have been my daughter since the night you arrived on my doorstep. I am never, ever going to let anyone take you away from me. I will fight the entire world before I let that happen. She looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy. Promise? I raised my right hand and drew an X over my chest. Cross my heart. No one is taking you anywhere. But the universe was determined to test that promise. 3 weeks later, the doorbell rang. It was not a baby in a basket this time. It was a man in a cheap suit holding a thick manila envelope. He asked if I was Bernadette, handed me the envelope, and walked away. I opened it at my kitchen table. It was a formal legal petition. Jolene and Vernon were suing me for the termination of my legal guardianship and demanding full, immediate custody of Opal. The court date was set for 30 days from now. I read the legal jargon, my stomach churning. They used phrases like biological superiority, best interests of the minor child, and alienation of affection. They were claiming that I had deliberately kept Opal away from her extended family to brainwash her. I immediately called Francine, the lawyer who had helped me secure temporary guardianship 10 years ago. Her hourly rate had gone up significantly, but I did not care. I emptied my emergency savings account and took out a personal loan from my bank to pay her massive retainer. Sitting in Francine's office the next day, I handed her the towering stack of paperwork. She adjusted her glasses, read through the petition, and sighed heavily. I will not sugarcoat this, Bernadette, Francine said, leaning back in her leather chair. Family court heavily favors biological parents. The system fundamentally believes that children belong with their biological mothers and fathers, assuming those parents are fit. Jolene has 7 years of documented sobriety. She has a stable marriage. She has a wealthy husband. On paper, she looks like a fantastic rehabilitation success story. But she abandoned her. I argued, my voice cracking. She left her in the rain. I have raised her for 10 years. Does that mean absolutely nothing? It means a lot, Francine assured me gently. 10 years is Opal's entire life. Judges are very reluctant to rip a child out of a stable, loving environment without a compelling reason. Our job is to prove that removing her from your care would cause severe psychological damage. We need school records, medical records, testimony from her teachers, and a psychological evaluation for Opal. The stress of the impending lawsuit invaded every corner of our lives. Opal started having terrible nightmares. I would wake up at 2 in the morning to the sound of her screaming. I would run into her room and find her tangled in her bedsheets, crying hysterically, shouting, "Do not let them take me. Hide me." I would hold her, rocking her back and forth in the dark, whispering the cross my heart promise over and over again until she finally fell back asleep. My heart broke into a million pieces every single night. I decided I could not just play defense. I needed to know exactly what I was up against. I took the last bit of money from my loan and hired a private investigator. I told him to look into Vernon and Jolene. They presented themselves as the perfect, wealthy, flawless couple, but I knew my sister. Chaos always followed her. I wanted to know where the cracks were. 2 weeks before the court date, the private investigator called me and asked to meet at a quiet coffee shop across town. I arrived early, nursing a cup of black tea, my nerves completely frayed. The investigator, a man named Miller with sharp eyes and a graying beard, sat down across from me and slid a thick, blue folder across the table. "You were right to trust your gut," Miller said quietly. "Your sister and her husband are putting on a very good show, but it is entirely a facade. Vernon's finance business has been failing for 2 years. He is drowning in debt. Their massive house in the Oakwood district? It has a second mortgage on it, and they are 3 months behind on payments. He is practically broke." I frowned, tracing the edge of the blue folder. If they are broke, why are they spending tens of thousands of dollars on high-priced lawyers to fight me for custody? Kids are expensive. Miller leaned in closer, dropping his voice. "Because kids can also be very, very profitable." He opened the folder and pointed to a stack of printed emails and database search logs. "I tracked Vernon's digital footprint for the last 8 months, Miller explained. He has been relentlessly searching for a man named Wallace Vance. Do you know who that is?" I shook my head. "No. Never heard the name." "Wallace Vance is a musician out in Seattle," Miller said. "And, according to some old medical records I managed to dig up from a free clinic Jolene visited before Opal was born, Wallace Vance is Opal's biological father." My breath hitched. Jolene never told me who the father was. She said it was a random hookup. "It was," Miller nodded. "But Vernon tracked him down. And here is the kicker, Bernadette. 6 months ago, Wallace Vance's grandfather passed away. There was a massive funeral out in Seattle. The grandfather was a real estate tycoon. Wallace inherited his estate. We are talking an $8 million inheritance." I stared at the printed documents on the table. The words blurred together. $8 million. "Vernon is drowning in debt," Miller continued, his voice cold and analytical. "If Jolene regains full legal custody of Opal, she can immediately file a paternity suit against Wallace Vance. With an $8 million inheritance on the table, a family court judge would award massive, retroactive child support. We are talking tens of thousands of dollars a month. Plus, they could demand control of a trust fund for Opal's future. They do not want to raise your niece, Bernadette. They want to use her as a winning lottery ticket to save Vernon from bankruptcy." The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. The sudden reappearance. The perfectly timed apologies. The expensive gifts to win Opal over. It had absolutely nothing to do with maternal love. It was a calculated, sickening cash grab. They were going to rip my daughter out of her home, traumatize her, and use her as a pawn to pay off a mortgage. A hot, blinding rage ignited in my chest. "Do you have concrete proof of this?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "I have emails from Vernon to a wealth management firm discussing the potential child support payout," Miller said, tapping the folder. "I have the foreclosure notices on his house. And I have proof that your parents have been funneling money to Vernon to help pay his legal fees against you." My own parents. They were paying the lawyer who was trying to destroy me. "Box it all up," I told Miller, sliding the folder toward me. "Give me every single piece of paper." I took the evidence straight to Francine. When she read through the documents, her professional demeanor completely cracked. She took off her glasses and rubbed her temples. "This changes absolutely everything," she breathed. "We are going to obliterate them." The morning of the court hearing, the sky was overcast and gray, matching the heavy dread sitting in my stomach. I wore a conservative navy blue suit. I had dropped Opal off at her favorite art teacher's house, not wanting her anywhere near the courthouse. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom. The air inside felt stale and oppressive. I walked down the center aisle and took my seat at the defendant's table next to Francine. Across the aisle, sitting at the petitioner's table, were Jolene and Vernon. Jolene was wearing a demure, floral dress that made her look like a gentle homemaker. Vernon wore a sharp charcoal suit. Sitting directly behind them, in the gallery benches, were my parents. My father refused to look at me. My mother glared at me, her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. Judge Althea, a stern-looking woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, entered the room. The bailiff called the court to order. This is a hearing to determine the permanent custody and legal guardianship of the minor child, Opal, Judge Althea announced, peering over her reading glasses. The court's sole priority today is the best interests of the child. We will hear from the petitioners first. Jolene's lawyer, a slick man named Davis, called Jolene to the stand. For the next 40 minutes, I had to sit in agonizing silence and watch my sister put on the performance of a lifetime. She wept beautifully. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, describing the agony of postpartum depression, the darkness of her addiction, and the grueling, painful journey to sobriety. I made a catastrophic mistake, Your Honor, Jolene sobbed, her voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. I was terrified I would hurt my baby, so I left her with my sister. It was an act of desperation. But I have fought every single day for 7 years to become a woman worthy of being a mother. I just want my daughter back. I want to give her the life she deserves. It was a masterclass in manipulation. If I did not know the truth, I would have pitted her. Vernon took the stand next. He reeked of arrogance. He confidently outlined his supposed financial success, talking about the Oakwood house, the excellent schools, and the international vacations they had planned. He painted a picture of a flawless, wealthy utopia waiting for Opal. Then came the real knife in the back. Jolene's lawyer called my parents to the stand. My mother walked up to the witness box, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. And then she sat down and lied through her teeth. Bernadette has always been deeply controlling, my mother testified, looking directly at the judge with wide, innocent eyes. When Jolene got sick, Bernadette took the baby and completely shut the rest of the family out. She refused our calls. She would not let us visit. She isolated the child to punish Jolene. We tried so hard to be involved, but Bernadette is a very bitter, angry woman. She has poisoned Opal's mind against her real mother. I felt a hot flash crawl up my neck. I gripped the edge of the heavy wooden table so hard my fingernails dug into the grain. Francine put a calming hand on my arm, whispering, "Let them dig their own graves." Wait. My father echoed the exact same lies. He claimed I was unstable, overworked, and keeping Opal hostage out of spite. When it was time for cross-examination, Jolene's lawyer, Davis, turned his sights on me. He walked slowly toward my table, looking me up and down with obvious disdain. "Ms. Bernadette," Davis started, checking his notes. "Is it not true that you live in a very small, 2-bedroom apartment?" "It is a comfortable apartment in a safe neighborhood," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "And is it true that you work 2 jobs just to make ends meet? That you are a school nurse by day, and you sit on a computer doing telehealth consultations late into the night?" "I work a second job to build my daughter's college fund," I answered, my chin lifting defensively. "So you are exhausted, overworked, and entirely alone," Davis pressed, raising his eyebrows at the judge. "You have no husband. You have a mediocre salary. You cannot offer this child a college fund that compares to what my clients can provide. You cannot offer her a father figure. Do you really believe, Ms. Bernadette, that keeping this child in your cramped apartment, while her wealthy, loving, biological mother begs for her return, is truly in her best interest?" I stared at him, the sheer audacity of his words ringing in my ears. If you've made it this far, please do me a favor, like the video and comment number 1 down below. It lets me know how awesome you are and shows that you're right here with me on this journey. Your support is a massive encouragement and truly motivates me. Drop that one so I can recognize you, and now, let's get back to my story. "I object to the characterization, Your Honor," Francine said calmly, standing up. "But we are ready to present our case." Francine called Opal's teachers, her pediatrician, and the child psychologist to the stand. One by one, they dismantled the picture the opposing side had painted. The psychologist testified forcefully that removing Opal from my care would cause severe, irreversible emotional trauma. He stated that Opal viewed me as her only mother, and that her anxiety regarding Jolene was profound. Finally, it was my turn. I walked up to the witness box, my legs feeling like lead. I sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and looked directly at Judge Althea. "Ms. Bernadette," Francine asked gently. "Tell the court about your relationship with Opal." I did not use legal terms. I did not talk about money or square footage. I just told the truth. "I am not a perfect person, Your Honor," I began, my voice clear and unwavering in the silent room. "I do not have a massive house. I do not have a six-figure salary. But for the last 10 years, I have been the only parent Opal has ever known. When she had the flu at 3 in the morning, I was the one holding the bucket. When she was terrified of the dark, I was the one checking under the bed. I taught her how to tie her shoes. I taught her how to ride a bike. I spent a decade working night shifts just so I could afford to take her to see a buffalo in Yellowstone." I turned my head and looked directly at Jolene. She avoided my gaze, staring at the floor. "Family is not just biology," I continued, feeling the tears finally prick my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Family is about who shows up." I showed up. Every single day for 10 years, I chose Opal. And she chose me. You cannot buy 10 years of love with a bigger bedroom. You cannot erase a decade of devotion because it suddenly became convenient to be a mother. I took a deep breath and looked back at the judge. She is my daughter. In every way that matters, she is mine. The courtroom was dead silent. I saw the court reporter wipe a tear from her eye. Francine stood up. She picked up a thick, sealed manila folder from our table. The energy in the room instantly shifted. "Your Honor," Francine said, her voice sharp and authoritative. "The petitioners have presented a narrative of a rehabilitated mother desperately seeking to reunite with her child out of pure maternal love. They have presented a narrative of financial stability. However, we have evidence that completely contradicts these claims. We request to submit this sealed folder into evidence." Davis jumped to his feet. "Objection. We have not seen this evidence. It pertains to newly discovered financial motives regarding the petitioners," Francine countered smoothly. Judge Althea frowned, intrigued. "Bring it to the bench, counselor." Francine walked up and handed the folder to the judge. The courtroom held its collective breath. I watched Judge Althea open the folder. She pulled out the stack of emails, the foreclosure notices, and the investigative report on Wallace Vance. She put on her reading glasses. For 2 minutes, the only sound in the room was the rustling of paper. As she read, I watched the color slowly drain from Judge Althea's face. Her neutral, judicial expression hardened into a look of absolute disgust. She looked up sharply, her eyes pinning Vernon to his chair. "Counselors, approach the bench," she ordered, her voice cold as ice. Francine and Davis walked forward. They spoke in hushed, intense whispers for a moment. I saw Davis physically recoil as he looked at the documents. He turned around and glared at Vernon, clearly furious that his client had lied to him. Judge Althea dismissed the lawyers and turned her full, terrifying attention to the petitioner's table. "Mr. Vernon," Judge Althea said, her voice echoing like a whip crack. "Are you familiar with a man named Wallace Vance?" Vernon's smug demeanor vanished instantly. He swallowed hard, his face turning an unhealthy shade of pale. I am not sure, Your Honor." "Let me refresh your memory," the judge continued, holding up a piece of paper. "According to these emails, which you sent from your personal account, you have spent the last 6 months aggressively tracking Mr. Vance down. You discovered that he recently inherited $8 million following his grandfather's funeral. And, coincidentally, you discovered he is the biological father of the child you are currently trying to gain custody of." A loud murmur erupted in the gallery. Jolene gasped, turning to look at Vernon with genuine shock. Vernon? What is she talking about? Quiet. Judge Althea snapped, banging her gavel. She looked at Jolene. Ms. Jolene, were you aware that your husband's business is currently facing bankruptcy, and your home is in active foreclosure? Jolene looked like she had been slapped. No. No, he said business was great. It appears, Judge Althea said, her voice dripping with contempt, that this entire petition for custody was not motivated by maternal love, but by a desperate attempt to secure a massive child support payout and control an $8 million inheritance to save yourselves from financial ruin. Vernon stood up, his hands shaking. Your Honor, that is a mischaracterization. I was simply looking out for Opal's future. Sit down and be quiet, sir, before I hold you in contempt of court, the judge roared. Vernon collapsed back into his chair, utterly defeated. Judge Althea then turned her furious gaze toward the gallery, right at my parents. And as for the child's grandparents, she said, her eyes narrowing. My mother actually shrank back in her seat. The evidence shows a long history of financial transfers from you to Mr. Vernon. Furthermore, you sat in my courtroom today, placed your hands on a Bible, and deliberately provided false testimony regarding your daughter Bernadette's actions. Perjury is a felony. I am strongly considering recommending the district attorney open an investigation into your testimony today. My father opened his mouth to speak, but the judge held up a hand, silencing him instantly. Judge Althea gathered the papers, squared them on her desk, and looked down at me. Her expression softened significantly. Ms. Bernadette, she said, her voice returning to a normal volume. You have provided a stable, loving, and safe environment for this child for her entire life. You have sacrificed your own ambitions to ensure her well-being. The evidence presented today proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Opal is exactly where she belongs. She picked up her gavel. The petition for a change of custody is categorically denied, Judge Althea ruled, her voice ringing with finality. Permanent, full legal custody and guardianship remain with Bernadette. Ms. Jolene is granted 0 visitation rights at this time, pending a full investigation into this fraudulent filing. This court is adjourned. She slammed the gavel down. Bang. The sound echoed through my chest, shattering the heavy weight I had carried for months. I slumped forward, burying my face in my hands, and sobbed. They were ugly, gasping sobs of pure relief. Francine wrapped her arm around my shoulders, pulling me into a hug. We got them, Francine whispered. It is over. I stood up, wiping my eyes. I looked across the aisle. Vernon was storming out of the courtroom, his lawyer chasing after him, yelling about being lied to. Jolene was sitting alone at the table, her face buried in her hands, crying hysterically. My parents were rushing out the back doors, looking terrified of being arrested. I did not feel sorry for any of them. I picked up my purse, thanked Francine, and walked out into the hallway. The sun had broken through the gray clouds outside, casting bright beams of light through the courthouse windows. I drove straight to the art teacher's house. When I knocked on the door, Opal came running down the hallway. She stopped a few feet away from me, her dark eyes wide and terrified, scanning my face for the verdict. Nana, she whispered. Did they take me? I dropped to my knees on the hardwood floor and opened my arms wide. No, baby, I choked out, a massive smile breaking across my face. They did not take you. The judge said you stay with me forever. We won. Opal sprinted into my arms, crashing against my chest so hard we almost fell backward. She wrapped her small arms tightly around my neck, crying into my shoulder. You kept your promise, she cried. You crossed your heart and you kept it. Always, I whispered into her wild dark curls. Always, Opal. The aftermath of the trial completely reshaped the landscape of my family. 2 days later, I demanded my parents meet me at a neutral coffee shop. I did not bring Opal. They sat across from me, looking nervous and deeply uncomfortable. The threat of a perjury charge was hanging over their heads, and it had finally broken their arrogant pride. I am only going to say this once, I told them, my voice cold and hard. You betrayed me. You lied under oath to tear my daughter away from me. You are toxic, and you are dangerous. From this moment on, you will have absolutely no unsupervised contact with Opal. If you want to see her, it will be in a public place, for 1 hour, with me sitting right there. If you ever mention Jolene, if you ever criticize my parenting, or if you ever try to undermine me again, I will cut you out of our lives completely. Do you understand? My father looked at the table, his jaw clenched, but he nodded. My mother wiped a tear away and whispered, "We understand, Bernadette. We are sorry." I did not care if they were sorry. I only cared that they understood the new rules. 6 months after the trial, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Jolene. She asked to meet me at the park near my apartment. I walked over on my lunch break and found her sitting on a bench. She looked exhausted. The expensive designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a plain sweater. The fake, wealthy veneer had completely washed away. "I wanted to tell you that I am filing for a divorce," Jolene said quietly, staring out at the empty playground. "I left Vernon. The bank took the house. He really did just want the money. He manipulated me into thinking it was about getting Opal back, but he just wanted to sue that Vance guy for the inheritance." I sat down on the opposite end of the bench, keeping my distance. "Are you still sober?" She nodded. "Yes. I am in therapy. A lot of therapy." Jolene turned to look at me, her eyes filled with genuine, profound regret. "You were right, Bernadette. About everything. Biology does not make a mother. You are her mother. You earned it. You fought for her when I ran away. I was so incredibly selfish. I just wanted to apologize. I am not asking to be in her life. I lost that right. But I needed you to know that I know you are the best thing that ever happened to her." I looked at my sister. The anger I had carried for 10 years finally began to loosen its grip on my heart. We would never be close again. The damage was far too deep to repair. But I finally had closure. "Thank you, Jolene," I said softly. "I hope you find some peace." I stood up and walked away, leaving her on the bench, and I never looked back. With the dark cloud of the custody battle finally gone, my life started to blossom in ways I had never expected. At work, my supervisor retired, and the school district offered me her position. I got the promotion. It came with a much better salary and an office with a window. With the new income, Opal and I packed up the cramped 2-bedroom apartment and moved into a beautiful little townhouse with a small, fenced-in backyard where Opal could finally plant the flower garden she had always wanted. We did not have an $8 million inheritance, but we had a home filled with laughter, safety, and unwavering trust. On the evening of Opal's 11th birthday, we ordered a massive pizza and sat on the floor of our new living room, eating slices directly out of the cardboard box. "Nana, I have a present for you," Opal said, her mouth full of cheese. She reached behind her back and pulled out a homemade card constructed from thick, blue construction paper and covered in glitter. I wiped my hands on a napkin and opened it. Inside, in her neat, looping handwriting, she had written a message that brought tears to my eyes. "To my mom, who chose me every single day for 11 years. Biology makes relatives, but love makes families. Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for being my real mom." I looked up at her, this beautiful, brilliant, resilient young girl sitting on my living room rug. I thought about the frightened 24-year-old nurse I used to be, crying in the supermarket aisle in wet scrubs. I thought about the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, and the grueling court battle. And as Opal smiled at me, a piece of pepperoni stuck to her cheek, I knew with absolute, unshakable certainty that I would do it all over again in a heartbeat. Have you ever had to fight for the family you chose? Have you ever had a moment where you realized that the people you share blood with are not necessarily the people who truly have your back? Let me know your thoughts down below. I read every single one. Thank you for letting me share my story, and I will see you in the next video.